We discussed how Josef K's entanglement with an opaque and indifferent legal system mirrors the existential crisis of modern individuals, those caught between the illusion of meaning and the daunting freedom of choice. And drawing from existentialist philosophy, we explored how Kafka portrays the struggle for identity and purpose within an absurd and often hostile world. Today, we take this discussion further by bringing Michel Foucault into the conversation. Specifically, we'll examine his concept of the Panopticon, a model of surveillance and discipline, and see how it relates to Kafka's vision of authority. And finally, we'll weave in existentialist philosophy to understand the psychological and ontological implications of living under such structures. Ironically speaking, we're still kind of into a Panopticon prison nowadays. So let us set the stage by talking about the main theorist for today's episode, Michel Foucault. He was one of the most influential philosophers and social theorists of the 20th century. His work spanned a variety of disciplines, including philosophy, history, political science, and sociology. Foucault's primary focus was on power, knowledge, and their relationship, which he explored through historical and philosophical investigations. His work remains vital for contemporary discussions on power structures, surveillance, and social institutions. So, Foucault was born in France in 1926 into a middle-class family. He studied philosophy and psychology at l'École Normale Supérieure, one of France's most prestigious institutions, and during his studies, he was influenced by thinkers such as Friedrich Nietzsche and Martin Heidegger, all of whom shaped his intellectual trajectory. Foucault's early academic career was marked by struggles with mental health, but eventually he completed his dissertation under the supervision of John Hippolyte. His initial work focused on the history of psychology and mental illness, which set the stage for later inquiries into institutions of power and social control. We're going to have a look quickly at his major works and theories. One of my favorite books by Foucault is Madness and Civilization. It's a book that examines the historical treatment of mental illness and the ways in which society defines and marginalizes the mad. He argues that the treatment of the mentally ill shifted from a medieval tolerance to institutional confinement, reflecting broader mechanisms of social exclusion and control. Birth of the Clinic is a book by Foucault, another book by Foucault that analyzes the development of modern medicine and how medical institutions exert control over individuals. And Foucault introduces the concept of the medical gaze, showing how power and knowledge shape our understanding of health and the human body. A lot of other works, such as The Order of Things, investigating the history of human sciences. Also, one of my favorite, Discipline and Punish, which is one of his most well-known works. This book explores the evolution of punishment from physical torture to modern disciplinary mechanisms, in which Foucault introduces the concept of the Panopticon, which is the model of surveillance and control originally conceived by Jeremy Bentham. And he did so to illustrate how power functions in contemporary society. Another book by Michel Foucault that is very, very interesting to read is History of Sexuality. In this multi-volume work, Foucault analyzes how sexuality is shaped by power and discourse. He challenges the idea that sexuality has been repressed in modern times, instead arguing that it has been subjected to increasing scrutiny and regulation. We're going to have a look at his key philosophical contributions, mainly power and knowledge. That's basically what is Foucault famously known for. His most enduring idea is that power and knowledge are intertwined. He challenges the traditional notion of power as something wielded by individuals or institutions, instead conceptualizing it as let's say, dispersed throughout social structures and relationships. And knowledge in this framework is not neutral, but serves as a tool of power. Another main idea of Foucault is discourse and truth. Foucault examines how truth is not an objective reality, but it is constructed through discourse. That is, systems of knowledge and language that define what is accepted as true at a given time. Institutions such as medicine, psychiatry, and law, they play a role in shaping those discourses. Another main idea by Foucault is the notions of biopolitics and governmentality. Later in his career, Foucault developed the concept of biopolitics, which explores how modern states regulate populations through social policies, medical institutions, and norms of behavior. And governmentality, which is another related concept that describes the techniques and strategies used by governments to manage and control citizens. So, one of Foucault's most compelling illustrations of modern power structure is the concept of the Panopticon, which is found in his major work, Discipline and Punish. So, this notion of the Panopticon, originally conceived by Jeremy Bentham as an architectural model for prisons, the Panopticon serves as a metaphor for how power operates in contemporary society through surveillance and self-regulation. In the next section now, we will explore the Panopticon in detail, examining its implications for modern institutions and its relevance in literature, particularly Kafka's The Trial. So, basically, the Panopticon is a prison designed and conceptualized by Jeremy Bentham. The idea is simple yet insidious. It's a circular structure with a central watchtower from which a single guard can observe all prisoners. The prisoners, however, can never tell when they are being watched. This is a very scary idea. And this uncertainty fosters self-regulation as they internalize the gaze of authority. In this way, power becomes diffuse, embedded within the individual's psyche, leading to what Foucault calls a disciplinary society. This idea extends beyond prisons. You have schools, hospitals, workplaces, and digital surveillance all operate under this logic. The Panopticon is not merely an architectural form, but a metaphor for modern governance, where power functions not through direct coercion, but through an omnipresent internalized control. Now, let's return to the trial, in which Kafka's protagonist, Josef K, finds himself trapped within an absurd judicial system that operates without clear rules or accountability. He is arrested, but never told the charges against him. Every encounter he has with the court reinforces a sense of inescapable scrutiny and powerlessness. In a way, Josef K lives in a panopticon. He doesn't know who is watching him, who holds power, or even whether he is guilty or innocent. Like Foucault's prisoners, Josef K internalizes the mechanisms of control, in which his guilt, though never substantiated, becomes an existential condition, a weight imposed by an indifferent and faceless system. You see, the real punishment is not execution, but the psychological torment of never fully understanding his own subjugation. What makes the trial such a powerful representation of Foucault's idea is that the way Kafka builds an atmosphere of constant observation and control without ever revealing the true source of power. Josef K is not physically confined like a traditional prisoner, yet he behaves as if he were, carefully navigating an opaque and hostile bureaucracy that governs his fate. His fear and paranoia mirror the way individuals in a surveillance society modify their behavior in anticipation of being watched, even when no direct authority is in sight. Now, in Foucault's vision of power, control is most effective when it is internalized. The panopticon works not because prisoners are actively watched all the time, but because they must assume they could be watched at any moment. Similarly, Josef K's suffering comes from the uncertainty and the omnipresent but undefined authority looming over him. His constant attempts to justify himself and navigate the system only reinforce his subjugation, as he unknowingly participates in his own oppression. Kafka's novel is thus not just a critique of bureaucratic absurdity, but also a profound meditation on the mechanisms of power and control. You see, the trial demonstrates how individuals can be trapped in invisible structures of authority, much like those Foucault described in Discipline and Punish. The novel, that is, the trial, foreshadows modern concerns about surveillance and state power, as well as the psychological consequences of being subjected to an unseen authority. And the trial is an existential nightmare to begin with. A world where the individual is crushed not by a tyrant's hand, but by an amorphous, that is, impenetrable system. When examined through the lenses of Camus, Sartre, Nietzsche, etc., you see, Josef K's predicament becomes emblematic of existentialist struggles against absurdity and other oppressive structures of power. And if you look at Camus, for example, and his notion of the absurd, we can look at his Sisyphean struggle in the eyes of Josef K. That is, we can look at the trial as a Sisyphean struggle, because another story that defines the absurd as the tension between human beings' need for meaning and the universe's silent indifference is found in Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus. It is one of the most important works in existentialist thought, though Camus himself rejected the existentialist label, preferring to call his philosophy absurdism. The essay, Myth of Sisyphus, explores a fundamental question like, is life worth living in a world without inherent meaning? And the myth itself is simple in The Myth of Sisyphus. You have Sisyphus, a cunning figure from Greek mythology, who is condemned by the gods to push a massive rock up a mountain, only for it to roll back down every time he reaches the top, and he must repeat this task for eternity. You see, an endless cycle of futile labor. For Camus, Sisyphus is the ultimate symbol of a human existence. We wake up, work, struggle, and chase after meaning, yet life offers no final answers, no divine plan, no ultimate justice, just a sad, indifferent universe. This is what Camus calls the absurd, the conflict between our deep desire for meaning and the silence of the world. So, Camus argues that recognizing the absurd does not lead to despair. It leads to a kind of freedom. If life has no inherent meaning, then we are free to create our own. But unlike existentialists like Sartre, who believe that we must forge our own values, Camus warns against jumping too quickly into artificial solutions like religion or ideology to solve the absurd. Instead, he proposes a third option: revolt. So, the conscious decision to embrace life despite its lack of meaning. This is where Camus' famous conclusion comes in. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. I remember that's how the book ends. And at first, this seems paradoxical. How can Sisyphus, trapped in a never-ending meaningless task, be happy? Well, Camus answers, happiness is found in defiance. That is, the gods intended his punishment to break him, but if he embraces his fate, he robs them of their power. By fully acknowledging the absurd and continuing anyway, Sisyphus turns his meaningless struggle into an act of rebellion. You see, much like what Nietzsche says, amor fati. So, a 21st century individual like us would ask, what can we learn from all of that? How can we find meaning in an absurd world? Well, we all have our versions of Sisyphus' boulder, that is the daily routines, the endless work, the responsibilities that never seem to end, and Camus challenges us to shift our perspective. We may not control the struggle, but we can control how we face it. Instead of longing for a grand cosmic purpose, we can find joy in the act of living itself, in the moment that is in the defiant embrace of existence. In a world that often feels chaotic and indifferent, Camus' message is clear. Meaning isn't given, but it is something we create, even in the face of the absurd. So, Camus describes how Sisyphus, his eternal and meaningless labor, mirrors our own search for significance in a world that offers none. And Kafka's protagonist, Josef K, finds himself in a similar predicament. He is arrested for an unspecified crime, forced to navigate a legal system that never provides explanations. Unlike the traditional, let's say, tragic hero who struggles against a known enemy, Josef K battles an abstraction. The court is a maze without a center, and every attempt he makes to understand his trial only deepens his confusion. Like Camus' L'Étranger, where Meursault refuses to conform to society's moral expectations and is condemned for his indifference, Josef K's fate is sealed, not because he is guilty, but because he seeks meaning where there is none. Camus argues that the absurd man has three choices: suicide, religious belief, or revolt. So, Josef K does not actively choose any of these. He neither embraces the court's logic nor defiantly rejects it. Instead, he drifts through the process, hoping for clarity that never arrives. His ultimate execution is a less punishment than a confirmation of his existential fate, that is, his death, like his trial. This is arbitrary and devoid of justice or reason. And if you look at the notion of the look by Sartre, it's introduced in a concept that he calls the gaze, le regard in French, which is a fundamental part of his existentialist framework. Sartre argues that when we realize we are being watched, we are transformed from subjects into objects. We become something that exists for the other rather than for ourselves. And the gaze strips us of autonomy, of authenticity, forcing us to see ourselves as others perceive us. Josef K is under a constant and pervasive gaze. Yet, he never knows precisely who is watching him or why. He is observed by faceless judges, by elusive court officials, and even ordinary civilians who seem complicit in his trial. This omnipresent but ambiguous, let's say, surveillance echoes the psychological effects of the Panopticon. Josef K internalizes his guilt not because he has done anything wrong, but because he is forced to see himself through the lens of an accusatory, let's say, external gaze. You see, this perpetual observation leads to alienation. He ceases to be an autonomous individual and instead becomes an object within a system that is a mere function of the system's inscrutable logic. The court never needs to impose control. The mere suggestion is that Josef K is guilty. That is enough for him to alter his behavior and question his innocence, ultimately accept his faith. Like Sartre's waiter who performs his role so rigidly that he becomes defined by it, Josef K unconsciously assumes the role of the accused until it consumes him. Now, let's relate this to Nietzsche and the concept of the will to power. Nietzsche's philosophy offers another perspective on Josef K's tragic fate. In The Will to Power, and also the book On the Genealogy of Morality, Nietzsche critiques structures that impose morality and meaning from above, particularly those that operate without clear authority. He warns against passive submission to faceless institutions that dictate one's existence without justification. The court, in the trial, is precisely such an institution. It has no undefiable ruler, no single judge or executioner, only an endless bureaucracy that perpetuates itself. It does not need to justify its authority because its victims, like Josef K himself, internalize its power and submit without questioning the foundation of its legitimacy. For Nietzsche, this kind of submission is the antithesis of the Übermensch. As a reminder, the Übermensch, we said in previous episodes, the self-overcoming individual who forges his own values. Instead of embracing his will to power, Josef K allows himself to be crushed by the absurd system. And Nietzsche, in response to that, would demand defiance, either by rejecting the court's judgment and its outright, or by asserting his own meaning in opposition to it. Instead, Josef K's resignation ensures that the system wins. His final words, and I quote, "like a dog," signal the complete annihilation of his agency, which is an acceptance of judgment without understanding or resistance. You see, to conclude with the case of this existential prison, Josef K is not merely trapped within a judicial process. He is ensnared, let's say, by the existential forces beyond his control. He seeks justice and truth, but the world offers none. His life is governed by an anonymous system that neither explains itself nor can be opposed. Through Camus and his absurdism, also Sartre's gaze and Nietzsche's critique of passive morality, we see that the trial is more than a dystopian bureaucratic nightmare. It is a profound meditation on the existential conditions of modern life. And just like in Foucault's Panopticon, the most terrifying realization is not that the system watches us, but that we begin to watch ourselves, accepting our own subjugation as inevitable, which is something, deeply depressing. Foucault's Panopticon and Kafka's vision are not relics of the past. They have simply evolved. Today, we live in an advanced digital panopticon, one that is far more pervasive and insidious than Bentham's prison or Kafka's nightmarish bureaucracy. Surveillance is no longer confined to prison walls or courtrooms nowadays. It is embedded in the fabric of our daily lives. You see, governments and corporations alike employ algorithmic governments to track and categorize and regulate individuals. Social media platforms, they turn us into both the watchers and the watched, where every action, every opinion is scrutinized and fed into systems designed to predict and manipulate behavior. You see, the Panopticon no longer needs physical watchtowers because we are willingly participating in our own surveillance. We are curating our identities for public consumption, and as well internalizing the logic of visibility. Just as Josef K never knows who truly holds power over him, look at how we exist in reality where the forces shaping our lives, like big data, like artificial intelligence and predictive analytics, all of them are largely invisible and unaccountable. And the absurdity of Kafka's world is now woven into ours. Decisions about our, let's say, credibility, our job opportunities, and even political beliefs are increasingly determined by automated processes that operate with the same opacity and indifference as the faceless court of the trial. The existential challenge remains. One might ask, how do we maintain our authenticity in a world where we are endlessly watched? Camus would remind us that true rebellion is not found in escaping the system, and it's not found in escaping the panopticon. It's an impossibility, but in asserting our own meaning within it. Like Sisyphus, Perhaps we must imagine Joseph K happy, not because he accepts his faith, but because he reclaims his autonomy by recognizing and confronting the absurdity of his condition. Yet, Nietzsche would demand something more radical. He would see the Panopticon as the ultimate expression of a passive and controlled existence, one in which individuals have surrendered their will to faceless institutions. You see, the only escape then is through the will to power, rejecting imposed structures, dismantling inherited values, and forging new paths beyond the reach of surveillance and control. In the end, the Panopticon, whether Kafka's, Foucault's, or our own, is not merely a structure of power, but a test of existential resistance. And the choice before us is not whether we are watched, but whether we allow that gaze to define us. The works of Dostoevsky, Kafka, Nietzsche, and Foucault, though often associated with existential despair and nihilism and the struggle of the individual against oppressive systems, they offer valuable lessons for the contemporary world. These authors explore the tension between individual autonomy and the structures that seek to control or diminish it. In their reflections on human suffering and alienation, as well as power and freedom, we are reminded of the importance of vigilance, of the quest for meaning. In the context of Notes from Underground, a book that we discussed in previous episodes, we learn about the individual's isolation and the complexities of a human consciousness. The protagonist's rejection of society and his embrace of suffering may seem bleak, but the existential questioning it inspires offers a roadmap for confronting our own alienation and let's say isolation in modern life. Today, with the rise of social media and the pressures of performance, we are constantly confronted by systems that shape and control our identities. Dostoevsky's work urges us to resist being swallowed by such societal expectations and to critically examine our roles within these structures. It calls us to engage deeply with our own inner turmoil, rather than submitting passively to external demands. Kafka's The Trial, in its depiction of an individual caught in the gears of vast and incomprehensible bureaucracy, is a potent critique of the modern state and its dehumanizing tendencies. The Panopticon, as articulated by Foucault, it resonates with Kafka's world of surveillance and control, where personal agency is undermined by unseen forces. Kafka and Foucault push us to acknowledge the structures of power that shape our lives, and whether that in the form of government, corporations, or social norms, and also the potential for these systems to make the individual feels insignificant or helpless. Their works compel us to reflect on how we interact with these systems and challenge us to resist passively in the face of pervasive control. Nietzsche's philosophy, on the other hand, particularly his ideas on the will to power and the Übermensch, provides a counterpoint to the pessimism found in Dostoevsky and Kafka. While Nietzsche recognizes the darkness of human existence, he also advocates for the possibility of self-overcoming. We explained in previous episodes that most people acknowledge Nietzsche as a pessimist and a nihilist. We broke that idea apart, actually. We explained how Nietzsche, although he acknowledges that such nihilism exists, yet he calls for evaluation of values, urging individuals to find meaning in a world that offers none. And his message can be seen as a kind of radical optimism, where personal growth and the ability to transcend one's circumstances offer hope. Nietzsche provides us with a vision of a human potential that, although demanding, yet it is filled with possibility for those willing to embrace it. Foucault, too, actually, in his exploration of power dynamics and the ways in which institutions shape behavior, he offers insight into how we can navigate contemporary struggles. And his work encourages us to think authority and to rethink about power, to emphasize that we are not merely subjects of systems, but can also find ways to resist and redefine them. Foucault's analysis of the Panopticon invites us to understand how surveillance has evolved in the modern age and how we might cultivate new forms of agency and resistance within these frameworks. So, is there optimism in these works? Yes, but it is hard-earned optimism. It is not the naive optimism of expecting the world to improve on its own, but the kind of optimism that arises from recognizing the need for active engagement with the world. You see, these authors, through their dark portrayals of human experience, encourage us to take responsibility for our own lives and to resist forces that dehumanize us, as well to seek meaning even when the world seems indifferent to our existence. They do not offer easy solutions, for sure, but instead, they call for a radical confrontation with the realities of our time. In applying their insights today, we can strive for a more authentic existence, one where we are aware of the societal forces that shape us and actively work against those that diminish our freedom. We can build a system of solidarity and support that encourage individual growth and autonomy. We can reflect on the ways in which power manifests in modern institutions and find ways to resist its more insidious forms. Ultimately, the optimism of these works lies not in the promise of an easy or straightforward path, but in the possibility of creating meaning and agency within a world that often seems designed to deny both. And the key takeaway in here is that despite the challenges we face, we are capable of shaping our own destinies if we engage with the world thoughtfully and critically. That's it for today's episode. Let me know what you think of this one and the series on existentialism so far. If you found the show helpful in any way, you can support me by following and leaving a review so it can appear for others too. Until the next time, keep philosophizing. Signing off.